Is theosophy essentially socialism? On the surface, it would seem so, and many students of theosophy may in fact subscribe to that political ideology. But when one goes deeper into the theosophical corpus, one finds contradictory statements on socialism. In this short video, we'll try to synthesize a framework to reconcile and sharpen our understanding of this subject. At the outset, it must be noted that theosophy unequivocally asserts that ethics cannot be inculcated nor human nature changed through legislation. Agreeably with Plato, theosophy holds that all outward expressions or phenomena are the result of inner causes or noumena, and hence changes in the outward conditions can be best brought about by changing the inner nature of man, the cause rather than trying to adjust external effects, which is the domain of politics. And hence, as this quote from William Q. Judge implies, theosophy is unconcerned with politics and political ideologies. But given the rise of populist socialism in many parts of the world today, it behooves us to analyze it in the light of theosophy. But before we throw the light of theosophy on the problem of socialism, let's first understand what it means. On the political spectrum from right to left, the rightmost end is that of capitalism. Most of us in the free world live in a capitalistic society. It holds private ownership to be sacrosanct, property, wealth, means of production, etc. Enterprises work with a for-profit motive. Markets are free and controlled by the forces of supply and demand. While the government may regulate, it doesn't attempt to control market with the principle of laissez-faire. On the leftmost end, there is communism. It calls for public ownership of lands, wealth, means of production. The stated motive of communism is the maximization of collective well-being. Hence, the rights of the collective trump that of the individual in the system. As such, the government fully controls the market with centralized planning. The goal of communism is to create a uniform, classless society. Socialism can be thought of as the stepping stone towards communism, which is really a socialist's desired goal. Here, the state may own the means of production of basic necessities while heavily regulating the rest. The stated goal of such a system is the maximization of common good. Markets are a mix of supply, demand-driven pricing, and centralized planning. The stated goal of communism is wealth distribution, which seems to find a lot of popular support in Western societies today. Since all of this sound so good on paper and has such growing populist support, why shouldn't we adopt socialism? Well, as it turns out, humanity has in fact tried this experiment many times. Let's look at the results. Joseph Stalin of USSR between 1930 to 1950 adopted socialist policies that resulted in him killing 20 to 61 million people through the Ukrainian famine, the Great Purge, Gulag systems, and so on. Mao Zedong of China between 1966 to 76 killed through his communist policies 65 to 80 million people, again great leap forward, famine, cultural revolution, labor camps, and so on. Pol Pot of Cambodia between 1975 to 1979 killed 25% of the then Cambodian population through communist policies, which was about 1.5 million to 2 million people. Again, killing fields, forced labor, mass starvation. Kim Jong-il, the father of Kim Jong-un of North Korea, in the 1990s killed 1 million to 3 million people, again through communist policies, political purges, labor camps, famine, so on. Ethiopia, Red Terror, 1976 to 78, killed about 1.5 million people. Viet Cong, re-education camps and political executions killed about 1 million people. Eastern Europe, political repression and purges in Soviet satellite states, Poland, Romania, killed about 1 million people. If you add all of this up, the global casualty from socialist and communist policies is about 100 to 200 million people killed. Just for comparison, World War II only killed about 70 million people. Literally, socialist and communist policies have killed more people and caused more suffering than the bloodiest war fought in remembered human history. Finally, the celebrated hero of the radical left, Che Guevara, who directly influenced Cuba, Bolivia, Congo, Guatemala, all of which are in extreme economic depravity today. He also indirectly influenced the whole continent of South America, whose human suffering is best illustrated by Venezuela, the latest example where 20 to 25% of the population have immigrated out of the country due to economic reasons. From all of this, it should be painfully obvious that socialism and communism does not work. To understand why, let's compare the core tenets of eternal verities with socialism. The third fundamental proposition of the secret doctrine posits that once the mind or manas is lit up, this is the human stage of evolution, all further progress has to be through self-induced and self-devised efforts. This implies that volition and liberty are preconditions for human flourishing. Whereas socialism is predicated on state-enforced morality of egalitarianism. The eighth item of Oriental psychology from Isis Unveiled states that races of men differ in spiritual gifts as in color, stature, and other external qualities. Whereas the goal of socialism is uniformity. The core tenet of Theosophy is universal brotherhood, which implies unity and universality, but not uniformity in external manifestations, which must necessarily, due to the law of karma, be hierarchical and non-uniform. Socialists here mistake uniformity for unity. Aphorism 21 states that karma is both merciful and just. Mercy and justice are only opposite poles of a single whole, and mercy without justice is not possible in the operations of karma. That which men call mercy and justice is defective, errant, and impure. Whereas socialism is all mercy and no justice, which goes beyond and directly against the grain of the law of karma. Law of karma is the law of harmony. It's the law of all laws. Eternal verity holds that all development unfolds from within without, and hence motives and ideas are where a reformation must start, while socialism tries to adjust external conditions with no regard to inner development. Socialism invariably fails because it is diametrically opposed to the very nature of reality as expressed by the eternal verities. The harshest criticism of socialism comes from the pen of HPB. Because socialism is so contrary to human nature and eternal realities, in order to enforce it, dictatorship and brutal force becomes a necessity. In her article, What Are Theosophists?, she writes, Theosophy is hostile to the insane dreams of socialism and of communism, which it abhors, as both are but disguised conspiracies of brutal force and sluggishness against honest labor. Information in this system, dictatorial system, must be tyrannically controlled and people brainwashed because it simply goes against the very nature of reality. In fact, this very quote was edited and obfuscated by Annie Besant, an evolved political socialist, in the first edition of A Modern Panarion. The first image you see on the screen is the original article published in the Theosophist of October 1879, which has the strong words denouncing socialism and communism, which we just read. The second image is from the 1895 edition of A Modern Panarion, which republished the same article, but the editor, Annie Besant, modified the article to remove all criticism of socialism. Of course, as history would have it, this ideologically motivated edit was the least of the sins Annie Besant went on to commit against Theosophy. She literally made a mockery of the very name Theosophy with her nonsensically grandiose claims and delusional policies. Such penchant for controlling information and hence people's minds and their will is entirely within the wheelhouse of the dark forces that are inimical to the Theosophical movement. Now let us look at a few examples of statements made against political socialism in the Theosophical corpus. The first comes from HBB's pen in her article, Let Every Man Prove His Own Work. It states, the secular philanthropist is really at heart a socialist and nothing else. He hopes to make men happy and good by bettering their physical position. No serious student of human nature can believe in this theory for a moment. Here, by secular, HPB means those who reject all metaphysical basis for egalitarianism. The second quote is from William Q. Judge in his article, Religion and Reform from a Theosophical Viewpoint. He writes, communism could not stand because in time the communist would react back into the holder of individual rights and protector of property, which his human nature would demand ought not to be dissipated among others less worthy. One can then ask, does this mean that we are condemned to capitalism with all its odious consequences? Well, the answer is no. We need to draw a clear distinction between political and individual socialism. Imposition of the flawed idea of egalitarianism in the form of forced and unnatural uniformity is the objective of political socialism. But to educate and cultivate the idea of self-chosen, voluntary, and volitional egalitarianism is the objective of individual socialism. For individual socialism to flourish, liberty is a necessary condition because spiritual progress is only possible when it is self-induced and self-devised. Hence, an ideal society would be collectively individualistic, meaning the government protects individual liberty, while being individually collectivistic, meaning people voluntarily adopt responsibility for the collective well-being. For this to happen, liberty in itself is not sufficient. People need to be educated in the eternal verities to overcome selfishness caused by the great dire heresy of separation. When one understands that universal brotherhood is not some distant ideal but a living reality, one will voluntarily exert oneself in the direction of exemplifying that ideal of universal brotherhood, which naturally leads to individual socialism. This kind of individual collectivism, in the words of Mahatma Gandhi, is essentially trusteeship, meaning you see yourself as a trustee, not an owner of your assets. The author of the bestseller book called The Psychology of Money, in doing research for his latest book, interviewed many billionaires to understand what true wealth really is. He concluded that true wealth has two essential components. First, having a purpose which is greater than yourself. And two, having the freedom to pursue it. Now, there is no greater self-transcending purpose than that of the Bodhisattva. And there is no freedom more liberating than that of freedom from desires. Hence, the combination of these two is the greatest wealth one can desire for oneself. And this is individual socialism. Now, let us look at some quotes from the Theosophical corpus that support this idea of individual socialism. The first is from Key to Theosophy, from the pen of HPB. Both Gospels, the Buddhist and the Christian, were preached with the same object in view. Both reformers were ardent philanthropists and practical altruists, preaching most unmistakably socialism of the noblest and highest type, self-sacrifice to the bitter end. Neither Buddha nor Jesus came to create a political system. They addressed the individual and extolled them to exert themselves towards perfection. They each gave personal ethical injunctions for the individual to transform themselves. The second quote is also from the pen of HPB in her article, What Shall We Do for Our Fellow Men? She writes, such socialists, too active altruists, full of unselfish love and charity, and ready to work for all that suffers and needs help, are decidedly worth 10,000 mystics and other theosophers, whether German or English, who talk instead of acting and sermonize instead of teaching. The second quote shows that the socialists, so called, that HPB honored, were not activists rioting on the street for greater handouts from the government, but the very opposite. The ones who sacrificed what they fully and truly earned and owned to alleviate suffering of fellow men out of unselfish love and charity. This is individual, voluntary socialism. In conclusion, imposed morality of egalitarianism in the form of forced and unnatural uniformity is the failed idea of political socialism. It is incompatible with eternal verities and hence will always be a source of untold evil masquerading as benevolence. On the other hand, the enshrining of individual liberty and the imparting of eternal verities will in time blossom forth into the realization that one's true nature is that of Yajna Purusha, the quintessence of sacrifice, and hence the highest need in Maslow's hierarchy, that of self-actualization, can only be realized with voluntary self-sacrifice for the well-being of the collective in conformance with one's true nature. And this becomes individual socialism. The objective of Theosophy and the United Lodge of Theosophists is to help bring about this truer realization of self and a profounder conviction in universal brotherhood, and hence usher in individual voluntary socialism. Thank you.